Okay, it appears the meeting is now live, so welcome to the special meeting of council for Tuesday, May 25th. I'll call the meeting to order and look to approve the agenda. Are there any changes, additions? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking then to the minutes of the May 11th special meeting of council. Are there errors or omissions? And let's be careful this time because we missed a couple the last time. Any errors or omissions on the minutes of the May 11th meeting? Seeing none, I move they be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. At this time, we need to reconsider the motion to approve the April 27th meeting. Ms. Hyde, are you speaking to this? Item C2, or there you go.
Thank you. Yes, as you mentioned already, Mayor Borman, the minutes of the April 27th meeting were approved a couple of weeks ago, and none of us caught an error that was in Councillor Hillstad's motion. And do you want me to show my screen? It's in your staff report. I
think we're good.
Okay, and so it was changing that number from 20% to 25% to reflect an earlier amending motion that had been approved by council. So my apologies for missing that. And while we're at it, we can correct a couple of typos as well. I'm sorry, Councillor Stanford, we got your name wrong a couple of times. So the cleanest way to put the motion for, put the motion for approving the April 27th minutes back on the floor and then move to approve it again with the amendments as set out in the staff report.
Great. Are there any questions from Ms. Hyde? I only have one question. How did Councillor Stanford miss the misspelling of her own name? That's my question.
I'm at a loss for words. You guys catch everything.
Yeah. I did notice how I voted. I just didn't notice how you spelled my name.
Okay, no problem. Well, if there's no questions for Ms. Hyde, thank you very much. Then I will move that council reconsider motion 125-2021. That the motion was that council approves the minutes of the April 27th, 2021 special meeting as presented. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. In which case I will move the council amend motion 125-2021 to read as follows: that council approve the minutes of the April 27th, 2021 special meeting amended as follows. Amend the first sentence in motion 97V-2021 by deleting 20% and inserting 25% in its place so that it reads, to achieve up to 50% of the targeted FAR bonus outlined in Table 2, all development applications shall include 25% of the approved number of residential units as vital home, affordable housing, or equivalent, regardless of tenure. I'll call the question on that amendment. Is there discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move that council amend motion 9, amend the minutes so that motion 97H 2021 and 97K 2021 delete Sanford and insert Sanford with a D in its place in the record of the vote on the motion. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We'll move on now to item E1, which is Bylaw 2021-05, the Three Sisters Village Area Structure Plan.
Excuse me, Mayor Borman. I think you have to go back to the main motion and approve the minutes as amended. You just went through 2 amendments, but you need to approve the minutes.
Right you are.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'll put that motion on the table that we approve the minutes of that meeting as amended. Discussion on that motion. So now I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And now we'll move on to item E1, Bylaw 2021-05, Three Sisters Village Area Structure Plan. And Ms. Smithers, you're presenting the staff report.
Yes, I am. I'm just going to share my screen. My presentation is focusing on attachment 1 of the staff report and just following up the direction to report back. There we go. We good?
Yes.
All righty. So I am here today to report back to council, as noted on the results of our meeting with Three Sisters Mountain Villages. There we go. So when council on the 11th directed administration to talk to Three Sisters Mountain Villages, we were given 4 explicit objectives in that discussion. First, to make sure that to respect council's interests in seeing that the phasing for the commercial development was largely complete prior to the majority of residential developments proceeding. Council was interested in ensuring that the MDP requirement of the area being a primary commercial development was respected. That we were also directed to make sure we respect the objective of reducing the residential unit count and density projections by approximately 1/3. And that was in support of achieving the primary commercial development concept. And then also ensuring that a minimum of 20% of all residential units were provided as affordable housing. So in preparation for the meeting, TSMV also submitted their objectives to participate in the discussion. And those were that the ASP be compliant with the MGA unless fully agreed to by TSMV. They wanted to ensure that financing, marketing, and delivery were core considerations, which makes sense from the landowner's point of view to ensure the viability and delivery of the plan as adopted. And then also they were concerned that some town goals may no longer be fully achievable with some of the amendments made by council. So that informed our discussion as well. So the conversation we had with TSMV focused on 6 topics that are all on the screen here. And I'm just going to go through each of those in turn. And what I would suggest is that I'll run through these topics with council, and then at the end of the presentation, we can maybe have, I'll entertain questions at that point, because some of these topics and themes kind of run together. So if that is okay, members of council, I'll just continue with presenting.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. The first topic was Indigenous engagement. So TSMV's concern with amendments that were proposed to the ASP related to the potential that development could be held up due to a lack of policy related to Indigenous engagement at the town level. They were concerned that the way that the amendment was worded suggested that they could not proceed with a conceptual scheme until that town-wide policy is created. They were also concerned about the lack of parameters that allowed for the Stoney Nations to choose not to be involved. So from the town's perspective, we're interested in ensuring that we have meaningful engagement with the Stoney Nakoda Nations. But we also appreciate the concern that it should be more of an invitation to participate rather than a directive, because it kind of goes against meaningful engagement if the policy is written to require the Stoney Nakoda Nations to do something that they may choose not to do or choose to do differently. So we were sympathetic to that concern put forward by TSMV. And the other thing for the town is that we wanted to make sure that the engagement with Stoney Nakoda Nations for those TSMV lands is consistent with what we would require for anywhere else within the town. This isn't just about TSMV. This was, as it was acknowledged even at first reading, there's a gap in our town-wide policies when it comes to engagement with Stoney Nakoda Nations, and we need to address that, and we need to address it at that town-wide level. So in keeping with that, we did land on a couple of suggestions for council should you choose to alter the amendments that have been put forward. The first would be that rather than that shall be included, very obligatory language, that the language is more permissive in terms of, we would look to language that would say shall be invited and highly encouraged to participate. So, and I think some of this discussion actually happened at council. There was concern about requiring participation rather than inviting it. So we would recommend that change there. And then also an addition in the piece around involvement of Stoney Nakoda Nations in the conceptual schemes, that we acknowledge that the absence of a town-wide policy at the time of application submission shall not be an impediment to the review and rendering of a decision. So we just want to be clear that there's not an expectation that we will not proceed on any conceptual scheme or land use in that area until the town-wide policy is done. That was a bit of a concern that TSMB had with the way that the amendment was originally put forward. And we think that makes sense. The next was related to phasing considerations. As you will recall, an alternate phasing plan was put forward through an amendment at second reading. TSMB had concerns with that phasing plan around the logical progression for efficient infrastructure development. Effectively, what the amended phasing plan did was created an island in the middle of the plan area that had to proceed first. So that had implications for servicing and grading. There's a cost implication to that, obviously, like a large span of grading and installation of services that wouldn't be actually tied into any development. But there's also, I think, an aesthetic impact there because of the amount of work that would have to be done in that area that would then sit bare for many years until the phasing progressed. TSMV also wanted to be clear that some residential is needed to support the commercial development in the area, which was it. I would suggest part of the consideration in the phasing put forward at second reading, but I think they just wanted to reiterate that point. In the town's interest was, again, ensuring the commercial happens before the residential. We wanted to see development proceed generally in a north to south direction because it supports that order of development. And then there was also some interest expressed in development adjacent to the wildlife fence being tied to the results of the adaptive management and monitoring plan. So trying to proceed in later phases with development along that wildlife fence. So what we agreed to with Three Sisters was an alternate phasing plan, which is the one on the furthest right there. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the original phasing that was in the ASP that saw development of a large, primarily residential area at the kind of southeastern edge of the plan area proceeding first. In the middle is the alternate amendment that was put forward at council to make sure that commercial happened first, or sorry, at council's second reading. And then what we worked out with TSMV, what administration and TSMV worked out together was an alternate phasing plan that would put that purple area on the north end of the plan developed as phase one, and then more of that village center area as phase 2A, and then it would proceed to the green piece, 2B, which is the hotel spa area. So we believe that this is a good alternative that does respect council's objectives of seeing the commercial, primarily commercial, proceed before residential. The next issue was tourist home versus visitor accommodation. As you'll recall, there was an amendment to change the tourist home language in the submitted ASP to visitor accommodation. TSMV had concerns with that because their fear was visitor accommodation language would lock them into a hotel style of development, and they did not see that there would be sufficient demand for that much hotel style development. They were looking for units to be able to be owner occupied and then rented out when the owners are not there, but with no limits on length of stay for either owners or people renting those units out. The town preferred that what was important to the town was that we maintained the commercial nature of those visitor stay units, recognizing that the area is supposed to be predominantly commercial. And that also we recognized in some of the council conversation that part of the impetus behind moving away from the tourist home language in the ASP was that that tourist home definition in our land use bylaw is seen by some to be problematic, both from a taxation and administrative point of view. Administratively, it's pretty cumbersome to administer. It kind of straddles land use and finance. And so we want to move away from using that tourist home definition wherever we can. So what we agreed to with TSMV was, and so another suggestion for an amendment we could put forward to council is changing the language in the ASP from visitor accommodation to what we would call village resort accommodation. And in the glossary of the ASP, we would define that as a commercial use that doesn't limit the length of stay of occupants, and it can accommodate a variety of building forms. So this wouldn't be a land use bylaw definition. I think another challenge with both the resort accommodation and tourist home language is people by nature default to the definitions that are in the land use bylaw when interpreting the intent of the policy statement, and they don't really line up. So we thought the best approach was be specific about village resort accommodation and define that in the glossary, and then apply an appropriate land use at that later stage once we work through conceptual schemes in the land use bylaw. The next one was the reduction of unit density. This was looking for approximately 1/3 reduction in the number of units in the plan area. TSMV had concerns that this would result in other town objectives not being met. Specifically, they were concerned about impacting our ability to achieve our modal split targets in the integrated transportation plan. And then they were also looking at the impact to our compact built form language in the MDP. And also this was linked to the viability of the plan for TSMV. So from the town's point of view, the residential density reduction by 1/3 was one of the objectives we were given by council to try to work towards. We want to ensure, as it says here, that the MDP policy, it's aligned with the MDP policy that says it's primarily commercial, and that there was this desire to reduce the density in the plan area. We weren't able to validate the claims related to achieving modal split targets. Intuitively, we would think that yes, in the short term, modal split targets, a reduced density might take us away from those, but it's also important to recognize that that would be balanced against overall lower trip generation, which would be a result of the 1/3 density reduction. So we're not really sure that that impact would be as stated there. Anyways, on this one, the town administration and TSMV were unable to find resolution in how to work towards a reduction in unit density. Excuse me. With regard to affordable housing, so TSMV's concern was that the 20% requirement, well, and frankly, any specific requirement is outside of what's allowable in the MGA. They were willing to live with a 10% commitment. They felt that that was over and above, and it is over and above what any developer would be required to do under the MGA. And then they also pointed out that in offering employee housing and looking at market rental as another opportunity, they're addressing that spectrum of affordability options, right from kind of non-market to near market to kind of entry-level housing. So in recognition of that, they also had a concern because of their provision of employee housing, which was over and above I think what the MDP would require. Their comment was that section 11.4 in the ASP that speaks to employee housing would need to be deleted if council still pushed for the 20% mandate of affordable housing. The town's perspective, again, we were working to that goal of council that a minimum of 20% of all residential units is affordable, is a council objective. And we also recognize that this balances the MGA regulation against not only the MDP target, but the intent of the NRCB decision, which is also considered in the MGA. So again, on this one, we were not able to find resolution, and we don't have any proposed motions to put forward. The wildlife fence was another issue of concern that came up for TSMV. The way that the policy was worded, it would effectively require the landowner to get a development permit just for the wildlife fence, which is a bit cumbersome. I would agree to that. And the town, frankly, agreed to that as well. Our intent was to make sure that the fence is built before construction proceeds on developments, but there are likely better ways that we can do that than what the policy contained originally. So our suggestion there is provided in red on the screen, that we tie the construction of the wildlife fence to subdivision approval rather than requiring it to get a development permit just for the fence itself. So with that, the recommendation is that Council put motion 98/2021 back on the floor to give third reading to 2021-05 Three Sisters Village Area Structure Plan as amended, and that Council consider further amendments as proposed in the summary that's in attachment 1.
Thank you. You didn't speak to the, oh yes, you did. Thank you. So question around the suggestion to create a definition of village resort accommodation within the area structure plan. That would then be required to be added to the land use bylaw. When would you see that happening?
No, it wouldn't be added to the land use bylaw because it's a definition that is tied to the policy. It was when creating the bylaw districts to create an appropriate district at that time.
Okay, so the other definitions, tourist homes and visitor comm and whatnot are all within the land use bylaw, but just doesn't need to be because it's defined within the ASP.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge that we had with the language around tourist home or resort accommodation, because they are both defined in the land use bylaw, but that's a different tool than an area structure plan. So we could arguably create a different definition for them within the area structure plan, but that just makes everything more complicated than it needs to be. So our intent here is to be clear on what it is the policy envisions, which would be the village resort accommodation, what we mean when we say village resort accommodation, and then that provides sufficient direction when the land use bylaw districts are being created.
Okay, thank you. There are questions for Ms. Smithers in regards to the report, Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you, Ms. Smithers, for that presentation. You had referred to the fencing plan on map 3. Can you elaborate to me where this fence would stop and start? Because map 3 shows it as the original connection with Smith Creek, but now there would have to be a new plan, I would imagine. And it's still incomplete, in my mind anyway.
What page is map 3, Councillor Sanford?
It's on page 37 of my agenda package. And that's the page that you referred to in your presentation. So I'm just flipping, or that's the map 3.
I am having a bit of trouble finding on the package. Hold on one sec, please.
I would have thought that would have been clarified with the meeting with planning.
Sorry, I've just got to open it up on my computer and the numbers are a bit different.
There are many maps.
So what page of the policy is it?
Page 14, I think.
Aerial photo and the wildlife fence. Yeah, so that shows it within the village ASP area, where it would end specifically at Stewart Creek. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the way it's showing now, it's contiguous with the other properties.
I would suggest that would be something we would be working out with TSMV post policy approval. Like, what does it mean given that Smith Creek did not get approved? Where's a logical endpoint to that fence? So I can't give you a specific answer now. I mean, it's outlined where the fence would generally be in the plan area. I think what you're
There is the map in the EIS that shows the full length of the fence, which from the village ASP area basically cuts to the north around the Stewart Creek Golf Course, and then works its way around and joins with the highway fence to the just to the west of the Stewart Creek across Valley Corridor. So that's the map that defines the map within the EIS, and presumably that's what the fence will look like.
Okay, I just heard you say that it would go around the plan area. And I was not sure if it was a complete perimeter fence around the plan area or that it connected to something else.
No, we didn't have a discussion about the fence beyond the mechanism with which it would be enabled to be built.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions then from Ms. Smithers? Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. With the proposed amendment to 11.6.1, replacing the shall with should, just who decides when the should can be allowed? Is that administration, council, the applicant? Just for it's for should follow the phasing plan as identified on map 22. So when it's shall, it's very clear, they should follow the map. When it goes to should, it's more a little up in the air of, a little leeway here and there. So just wanting to know who holds that say for when a should can actually be allowed.
It would be administration. I'm not sorry, we made a lot of amendments. So maybe to a reference on the attachment, that would be helpful.
It's page 19 of the agenda, or page 7 of the attachment 1, top of the page.
Okay. That was related to to generally complete, should follow. Yeah, so that would be administration following the direction of the policy. Part of the concern there was, again, shall is very obligating language, right? Whereas the should provides, it's permissive language, but it does provide more interpretation, which is important in this instance, because if we said the shall there absolutely requires like all of the phasing to be complete in that one phase, like before anything proceeds in the next phase, right? So it doesn't really allow for a smooth transition, which could arguably be in the town's interest as well as TSMV's. That also showed up when we talked about commercial development. If there is strong language around all commercial shall be completed prior to residential. So what if there's one commercial building that is still outstanding in the last of the previous phase, right? We basically prohibit anything from happening until that commercial piece is done. So, which isn't the intent of the policy. The intent of the policy is to say, we want the phasing to follow the sequence in the policy itself. And also we want generally the bulk of the commercial to be done before residential proceeds, but we don't want it to be so prohibitive that it just overly obligates either the town or Three Sisters to make sure that one area is complete in its entirety before anything happens.
Thank you.
Are there questions for Ms. Smithers? Seeing none, then thanks very much for doing this work and bringing it forward. And with that, then I will put third reading back on the table. So I'll move the council place motion 98, 2021 back on the floor, that council give third reading to bylaw 2021-05, Three Sisters Village Area Structure Plan as amended. And are there any proposed amendments to the bylaw at this time? Councillor Comfort.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Yes, I have an amendment. I'm going to accept Amendment 1, the suggestion from administration that to change my initial amendment from included to invited to participate, or invited and highly encouraged to participate. Thank you, Ms. Hyde. It's very weird that the admin has to, and doing this on my phone, I must apologize. It's a bit disorienting to try and go back from my phone screen to my laptop. The laptop does not appear to like Zoom this morning, so I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
So that, and I understand the reasoning behind this to make it more inclusive and welcoming. And I'd like to reiterate, as I did when we discussed this amendment previously, that it was never my intent to dictate or to tell anyone else what to do, let alone the Stoney Nakoda. So everyone seems to think that this is the preferred and more inclusive wording. I will defer to that and put this motion forward, or put this amendment forward.
Is there a discussion then from council on Councillor Comfort's proposed amendment, which is detailed on the share screen? I'll support this for the reasons you've described. It meets the intent, which is to invite and highly encourage the Stonian to be involved in all that we're doing here. But as was noted by administration, it's really over the top to demand Stoney Nakoda do that. So I think this is a good language to use. The discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed, motion's carried unanimously.
And then I have a second amendment. But I have a bit more, sorry.
I was just going to ask if that's available on the share screen.
I think Ms. Hyde has this one as well.
Yes, right away.
And so the initial intent of my motion was that we did not actually have a policy as it was described earlier. So I had proposed this amendment because future is nothing. I mean, it's something that will happen in the future, we hope, but it's not there yet, and there's nothing concrete or definitive. So we need to accommodate that. So I thought that the recommendation of the absence of a townwide policy to delete future, add townwide, and then the further language of the absence of a townwide policy at the time of application submission shall not be an impediment to the review and rendering of a decision on the application by the town. So this means that things will not be held up because the policy doesn't exist. And I had more difficulty with this because is this a kick in the pants to us to get that policy in place? Or is this an excuse to not have anything in place? Because if we don't have anything in place, then we don't have to, you know, it's not subject to the review. So I had a bit of difficulty with this one, and I'd like to hear from my fellow councillors and the mayor and admin.
Well, admin's past their time here. This is council now.
Okay. So I'll go for yourself and the councillors, Mr. Mayor.
So what exactly are you?
Well, it's just that it sort of, I'm just rereading what my concern was. Okay, yeah, I know what it was. If we drag our feet, putting a town-wide policy into place, then there's no impetus to create that town policy if the development can proceed. So I was a little concerned there, and wanted to be reassured that it meant that was not going to be an abdication of our responsibilities.
Well, it would certainly behoove council and administration to do this work quickly. And it follows, I think, on the heels of the direction that council gave administration at the second reading, if I recall, around creating an MOU with Stoney Nakoda that would speak to this and other aspects of engagement. So
I would agree, and that's what I hope for in proposing that MOU, that we get that rolling as soon as possible. And I'd like to know what other councillors think.
So speaking to Councillor Comfort's amending motion then, Councillor Sanford.
Mayor Barman, I went back and reread the NRCB decision, and there was very, very distinct language in that decision regarding the Stoney Nation. And I think it's important to understand that we didn't have a townwide policy in 1992 about Indigenous relations. And it was stated very clearly in the 1992 decision that those are considerations that have to be taken into account when making the decision about how this land is going to be reviewed and allocated. So I don't see this being any kind of impediment to what TSMV is accountable to in their relations with the Indigenous people, because it was stated very clearly in the 1992 decision. I think the addition of this one sentence makes it the application put forward that it can go forward without a townwide policy. I don't think that that was ever a condition that needed to be our concern. So I think it was a good catch on planning's part, having that conversation with the applicant, and adding this sentence, I think, keeps it within the situation that we're in right now, but it was always intended from 1992. So I appreciate this being reviewed and being better framed in the circumstance.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCallum, did you have your hand up?
I did. I guess I want to make sure, like, when we're talking about the time of application submission within this amendment, are we talking about the ASP application? Are we talking about the conceptual scheme application? What application are we speaking of?
The motion refers to conceptual schemes.
Okay, all right. Okay. And I appreciate Councillor Sanford's words around the NRCB decision. I did something similar a week or so ago, pretty much right after the public hearings. And I guess we're stuck again in this rat trap where we are looking at 30-year-old language and we're trying to plunk it in 2021 context when our federal government's about to pass legislation that is going to affect all of these discussions. I guess what I'm trying to say, Councillor Comfort, is I don't have an answer to your question in terms of what you're looking for from your colleagues.
Okay, so we're speaking to the substance of this amending motion, though. Is there other discussion on Councillor Comfort's amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in support? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. So I have some amendments related to the suggested phasing map that's being developed between Three Sisters and Town Administration. If Ms. Hyde could put on the shared screen the 4 related amendments.
Will do.
And while that's going up, I'll just speak broadly to it. At the last reading, I brought forward an adjusted phasing map, which was approved by council, and the intent of that whole piece of the work was to be certain that commercial development would occur by and large before most of the residential, certainly before the residential that is largely single or less dense. But I'm not a land planner. I really wasn't certain how the phasing map that I proposed would play out in the real world, whether it could be developed as suggested or not. And if you'll recall, the map that we approved through my amendment showed the first development being phase 1, which was a big portion of the ASP area, but right in the middle. And I understand how, in having heard from the administration, how the course of development is much more practical if it starts on one edge and works towards the middle rather than starts in the middle. So I understand that, and I particularly like the fact that the proposed phasing map that we're looking at now includes all of the village center in the first phase. That really, I think, is an important target and brings great certainty to the community that the goal to have good balance in between commercial and residential tax base will be addressed. And it's noted in the staff report that with this proposed phasing plan, we'd see about 340,000 square feet of at-grade retail in the village center, and 500,000 to 1 million square feet of resort accommodation floor space in phase 1. That's all commercials zoning, so commercial taxation, and of course sufficient residential in that phase to allow for the commercial to be successful. So I appreciate the suggestions, and I accept the suggestions as providing a better approach to phasing than what I had developed earlier. So there are 4 bullets to this amendment that I'll support. And that is that council amend map 22 and schedule A as approved at second reading of bylaw 2021-05 by and substituting it with the revised map 22 in attachment A. The council amend section 11.3.12 of schedule A by deleting the words phase 4 and replacing them with phase 1. And that just recognizes that the phasing maps have different numbers attached to different phases. The council amend 11.4.1B of schedule A by deleting the words 5A and replacing them with 5. Again, that's an editorial change. and that council amends section 11.4.2B of Schedule A by deleting the words 5A and replacing them with phase 5. Again, editorial change. So that motion is on the table, and I'll look for discussion from members of council in regards to this amending motion. It's a pretty important part of the SP, so I'm looking for conversation here. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor. So I would support this. I agree that when we as a council were looking at changing the phasing, it was in response to public feedback on ensuring the commercial components occurred, as well as the higher risk sort of buildings were built. But understanding that we aren't developers either, that there is well, it's not a black art, but it is certainly gray sometimes, a gray art in how these things play out. I would say that the substance of our intent is still here in terms of having the commercial move forward and the residential come alongside as well as near the end. So I would be happy to support this amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amending motion? Councillor Sealy.
I'll also support this. It does improve the phasing and put a priority on the commercial aspect of it. And with some residential supporting that, it makes sense. So I do like the improved phasing in this motion.
Councillor Hillstad.
I will also support this. As said already, it does still meet what we were trying to achieve with getting the commercial first. So keep it simple. Yeah, it still works, so I'll support it.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I had some concerns with the previous phasing map, having cut the village center in half. And I think this phasing plan makes a lot more sense. Having the residential pod with the commercial pod. And I would wonder if that residential that's being proposed at the first stage would be enough to support that commercial pod that's in here. So that would be a question. But if it was proposed in the phasing plan, it seems like it is achievable, so I will support it.
Councillor Comfort.
I think that this gets to our objective of having sufficient commercial go forward at the time of the residential, and I would also support it.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you. As what you stated, I will support this. As we are not the planners, when it requires infrastructure and how it makes sense to proceed. So that's why I will support this.
Any further discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Ms. Hyde, if you would put the shared screen up to reflect the next amendments that I have, which are detailed in the staff report on attachment 1 under what's labeled amendment number 4. And we talked about it earlier when before the bylaw was on the table, and it's in regards to village resort accommodation to replace visitor accommodation. There's a couple of other bullet points as well, but we'll just look at these ones. So again, it was an amendment that I brought forward at second reading to remove the references to tourist home and substitute a visitor accommodation. And in drafting that amendment, I spoke with planning department, and initially I'd thought about suggesting the use of Three Sisters Resort Accommodation, which was an existing land use in the land use bylaw. But for various reasons, planning felt that wasn't the best approach, and planning recommended to use visitor accommodation, which we're familiar with. There's a number of units already developed in Canmore that are zoned visitor accommodation. This proposed new definition meets my intent, which is essentially that all of the units in village resort accommodation will be commercial in use, regardless of the occupancy. And so providing commercial taxes and helping once again to balance the commercial and residential tax base to bring that split in line with our long stated targets. So I don't know if I need to speak to each bullet. The first motion is that, well, actually the first motion has to be considered separately. So I'll move the council reconsider motion 97E 2021, which was moved by Mayor Borman, that council amend motion 97 2021 by amend Schedule A by deleting all references to tourist home or tourist homes in the area structure plan and replacing these references with visitor accommodation in a number of sections. So the municipal clerk notes that this reconsidering motion must be passed by two-thirds majority. And then if that happens, then we can vote on the amendments. So on the motion to reconsider, is there discussion? Councillor Sanford?
I looked at this carefully, and
I'm sorry, right now we're just discussing the motion to reconsider. And if that passes, then we'll get into the subsequent amending motions.
okay, thank you.
So on the motion to reconsider, seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motions. Councillor Sanford, you voted in favor. Let's try that again. On the motion to reconsider, those in favor? And opposed? Okay, motion's carried with enough votes to proceed. So then back to the proposed amendments. And if we can have that on the shared screen. Thank you. So as been discussed, the intent is to just provide a different land use within the area structure plan that meets the goals, meets the intent of council in creating certainty around a good amount of commercial zoning, and as I said earlier, to balance out our commercial residential tax split. So speaking to these three motions, or these three parts of a motion, Councillor Sanford.
Yes, my concern with this change is that the village resort accommodation is going to increase the trend towards second home ownership. And I appreciate that visitor accommodation is an option that people have to buy a commercial property, and then they are incentivized to rent it out. They are also incentivized to be short-term residents of that visitor accom. The village resort accommodation will encourage people to be more flexible, and the flexibility will, I think, foster a second home ownership type of accommodation that will not be as incentivized to rent out because people don't have to. And when people don't have to, then the flexibility actually works against us if those units are left vacant for long periods of time. if we're trying to build a commercial area right adjacent to that and have the vibrancy, we need those places rented out. And this is too much flexibility. So I can't support this.
Arguably, under the existing zoning, the same thing could occur. People would be buying them as second homes, not living them in them permanently necessary, but not renting them out. That's how currently, that's the experience with visitor accommodation in other districts. So I fully expect that a number of the units being developed there will ultimately be owned by non-permanent residents, which is why it's been so critical that we stick to the 20% of all units, residential units, being perpetually affordable. I really think this visitor village resort accommodation meets the expectation, the intent of council. It's commercial. It balances the commercial and residential tax base to a large extent. So appreciate your perspective, but I would continue to support the motion. Is there other discussion on the motion? Councillor Seeley?
I'll support the village resort accommodation. I think it meets council's intent and provides flexibility to the applicant. Also, it improves our commercial tax bases as discussed. I'll support this.
Further discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Sanford's comments have certainly given me pause for thought, but when I think of people I know that own visitor accommodation units with a 28-day limit, they're used in a similar fashion. You know, really, you just need to move away for one night, check back in the next day, and you're meeting the intent of the bylaw. I don't think it happens on a large scale, but I do think it happens. And much like in that case, there's really little we can do about it. I guess the comfort I receive is that over the long term, that those folks might not own it, and it will be passed on to somebody that probably will want to have it rented out more frequently. And again, that I truly believe that's a minority of owners. But I do appreciate you bringing that forward and making us think about that a little harder, Councillor Sanford. Thank you.
Councillor Hillstead?
I think I'll be able to support this motion. My biggest issue with the tourist home, the previous tourist home, is the fact that we allow for tourist homes to be either considered residential or commercial. So we don't have that guaranteed commercial income. Whereas the original change to visitor accommodation kept it fully commercial. And I see this as still keeping it fully commercial, just giving more options to whoever owns it to, it can be used as a timeshare, as vacation rentals. Like it gives it more, flexibility, but at the same time, it still keeps it commercial, which is the main intent of our original motion, was to take away that chance for residential tax base and to have it more focused on the commercial tax base. So the intent of it still follows the intent that we were going for. So I will support this.
Further discussion on the amendment? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm recognizing that the hotel accommodation that's being proposed is also being proposed to move over to visitor accommodation. So from the original number of hotel rooms that were required, moving some of it over to visitor accommodation, and yes, collecting the tax base on it, but the vibrancy element is of my concern. If you have a hotel and you have hotel rooms where people are expected to cycle through the process in a relatively short period of time, if you move those units over to visitor comm and then allow people to live in them, you are essentially reducing that vibrancy and the turnover and the whole idea of having a hotel. You are then moving it over into more of a residential type of unit. And we know from other developments where suites are required, where amenities are required to build some density, it's very much at the owner's discretion whether those opportunities are used. So to give the owner this much discretion actually reduces what we have tried to design with a hotel property and a resort. So that would be my only consideration of reviewing this to what everybody else has said.
I would note that regardless of who's living there, as long as people are in the unit, there's that vibrancy, whether they're visitors paying by the night or owners that own the unit and are living there, or arguably having guests or renting out. Is the key is having people in the units. So either way, the same level of vibrancy would be added to the village center, in my opinion. So further discussion on the amendments? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Berman. Through the chair to Councillor Sanford. And so I don't have an opportunity to flip through this quickly. Councillor Sanford, in your opinion, are you stating that this change not only, it's not only affecting the tourist home units that we had switched over to visitor accommodation, but the units that were considered strictly for hotel? I'm just looking at table 1, visitor accommodation, hotel rooms.
What page is that on?
Page 68 of 157, 45 in the plan, neighborhood framework.
Right, so those visitor accommodation units that are referred to would become what's it called now? Village resort accommodation. It'd be the same units, just with the different name. So those are the units within the village center, not within the residential district.
And not within the hotel and spa district?
And then, of course, same thing with hotel and spa district.
They would become visitor.
They would follow the new definition and be a mix of those and typical hotel rooms operated as a standard hotel operation.
But they would all become, those standard hotels would all become visitor, sorry, what's the terminology? Village resort accommodation as well. Is that correct? Am I understanding correctly?
I think the owner would be able to operate it as a standard hotel and with the desk and.
So no, my question, without having to go through the plan, I'm catching the nuance of Councillor Sanford's argument, and I'm trying to confirm that I understand the nuance. So what I am trying to understand is when I look at table 1, which is sort of the dumbed down version of all of the changes, and in the village center, this change would turn all of those visitor accommodation units that are listed within the village center into village resort accommodation. And then what would happen to the hotel and spa district rooms, the visitor accommodation / hotel rooms, that range that's described between 200 and 350? Also?
No, that the builder developer could operate any of those properties as standard hotel properties, operating on a per night rental basis and with a desk and just as the Malcolm is today, for instance.
Okay.
Doesn't force the property owner to operate under one model or the other. It's if they're choosing to operate what has been considered a visitor accommodation. They're operating under the village resort accommodation model, but it doesn't preclude other types of visitor accommodation like a hotel. Councillor, Ms. DeSoto.
Sorry to interject into debate, Mayor Borman, but I'm wondering if I could add a point of clarity for Councillor McCallum that might assist.
Please.
Yeah.
Because this motion is being reconsidered, you're actually going back to the original table 1 at first.
Oh, no.
That has the word tourist home in it. So you're replacing the word tourist home with village resort accommodation. So you're not replacing visitor accom with village resort accommodation. I hope that adds clarity. So there will still be visitor accommodation as well as, so you're just replacing tourist homes.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe you can answer my question because I don't feel like I'm getting a clear answer, and that's okay. So within, and I'm unfortunately looking at our updated version of table 1. My other ASP is in the other room. So the changes within the village center that were tourist home that we amended to become visitor accommodation, these are the only units that we're looking at switching over to this village resort accommodation. Am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Because I was worried that what that meant was the visitor accommodation hotel rooms under the hotel, spa, and district listing, that they too would become that. And therefore I could understand completely Councillor Sanford's concern. But okay, all right, thank you. My head's straight, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. DeSoto. Councillor Hillstead, you had your hand up.
My question got answered. Thanks.
Councillor Sanford.
Let me throw in another wrench for Councillor McCallum to consider. If you amalgamate the visitor accommodation units in Village Center with the visitor accommodation units in the hotel district, the range is 750 to 1,200 in the Village Center and 200 to 350 in the hotel district. So essentially what we would be accomplishing with this is taking the 750 to 1,250 units in the Village Center and turning them into potentially full-time second home ownership. So there's a significant increase in the potential to have full-time residential in those areas that we were counting on to shift some of the hotel units into that Village Center. So there was a shift in hotel residency, and it was shifted to the Village Center, but now we're allowing for a longer stay in those units and allowing the flexibility of the owners to decide how often those units are inhabited.
Yep, and I understand that, Councillor Sanford. I just wanted to make sure the entire swath, but I don't believe that in practice it will actually work out that way, because that's not the way it's working out in practice right now.
Further discussion on the proposed amendment? If there's none, I'll call the question, and this is for all 3 bullets, so that one multi-part amendment. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor Sanford in opposition. And then Ms. Hyatt, if you'll put the next amendment on the share screen that I'll be bringing. It has to do with the intent to ensure that the exclusionary fence is fully constructed as a part of the first subdivision. The original motion, the full intent of the original motion was that the fence would be in place before any development was there, that there wouldn't be people we're living there without the fence protecting the corridor. The suggested change here, that the wildlife fence shall be fully constructed along the boundaries of the plan area shown on map 3, following the first conceptual scheme approval and as a requirement of the first subdivision approval within the first conceptual scheme as part of the associated subdivision servicing agreement, meets the intent that council had, which is to have the fence in place prior to the first subdivision. So can support this amendment. It meets the my intent in the first place. Discussing this amending motion. Is there any discussion? Councillor Stanford?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I have a real difficulty with this fencing plan, mostly because of it's not clear where it's going to start, where it's going to end. And my concern is also that this fencing plan will constrict movement on the south boundary of the property, as well as putting people into a situation where they may be in closer contact with wildlife if they're on the outside of the fence. The other aspect of this fence that concerns me is that if it's a fence around the property that begins and ends, and it's not a full perimeter fence, any wildlife that is moving from the valley bottom or the river will be corralled in this fence. And the wildlife is going to have a very confusing way of getting to the corridor that they might have been familiar with before this fence was put in. So I'm not supporting this fencing plan at all. And I can't do that even with the amendment.
So you're simply opposed to the use of fencing, period?
I'm not in favor of the fencing. You're right.
Period.
Period.
Right. So in regards to this, this proposed amendment, if it should be approved, would you, I mean, you should be trying to craft the ASP so that even if you can't support this section of it, it's as best as possible in your mind. I mean, if you don't support fencing, that's fine. But if the ASP is approved and you have an opportunity to tweak this section of it so it's more in line with your preference, then this is the opportunity. I will once again point to the map and the EIS, which very clearly shows the full fence line and joining up with the highway fence on both east and west. And I think it's reasonable to assume that the full fence line will be defined before the first conceptual scheme is approved. That conceptual scheme can't be approved if there's uncertainty about where the fence goes or is. So I think that's inherent in the use of conceptual scheme approvals. Not sure if your screen's frozen or you're thinking.
I am thinking.
Okay, great.
And I understand that this is to determine when the fence goes in and that there's a better time than what was first proposed for the fence to go in at a different phase of the subdivision.
And I'm just suggesting that this amendment is, or what you're speaking to isn't really germane to this amendment. This is talking about when the fence has to be built, not whether or not there is a fence, whether that's a tool or not.
Okay, I can see your point. And I think this is a better amendment than what was originally proposed.
As do I. Further discussion on this amendment then? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Okay, there's one more amendment that I have prepared. And Ms. Hyde, if you could put it up. It has to do with the completion of commercial and the development, the flow of development. So the current direction is, as stated in the approved, the originally approved amendment was that now I'm losing track of my thoughts here. The intent of this is to have essentially all of commercial development approved before most of the residential. The wording that's being proposed by administration, as noted, is less restrictive and would be beneficial and still keeping with our goals. So replacing shall with should, such that the new clause reads, all development for Three Sisters Village should follow the phasing plan as identified on map 2. And Councillor Hillstead asked a question about that earlier. That leaves a little bit of flexibility. So if a phase is not 100% complete, then there's still the ability to start planning on the next phase, but it doesn't open it up for phasing to be happening out of sequence. And then most of the other bullets here are somewhat editorial to reflect different phase numbers on the revised map. So the most impacting part of this proposed amendment is to replace shall with should, so that all development for Three Sisters Village should follow the phasing plan as identified. And then the subsequent bullets is to amend the reference to phase 5A with 5 and the village center rather than all commercial development, so that prior to phase 5 of the Three Sisters Village ASP, the village center shall be generally complete. And again, I would suggest that's been the intent of council through the discussions. The next bullet is just correcting typo, which was the map that was referred to as 23 should have been map 22. The other bullet is to insert each phase of after development within, so that it would read development within each phase of this ASP shall occur in a sequence that reflects the availability of the required utility infrastructure and roadways in accordance with this ASP. So that I think helps bring certainty to the development in regards to the utility infrastructure. And the last bullet is that essentially that a redundant clause be struck. So strike clause 11.6.6. The resort recreation area should be developed in alignment with the development phases on map 22. And as it's noted, that's repetitive of earlier section. So, is there discussion on this proposed amendment? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I have difficulty with the replacing shall with should in this particular instance. I think that it is beneficial to look at the holistic plan and realize that, yes, you do have to move ahead in a logical way through the plan area. But I think that leaving this open to interpretation is going to cause difficulties in the long term because there is no obligation to do it a certain way. And I think what we will see in the future is amendments coming forward to change this because of the word should in here. The applicant will be looking for opportunities to reallocate the land use and reallocate the phasing if this is stated the way it is. So I prefer it to the way it was.
And I would note the administration's suggestion that revising this wording would be beneficial and still within in keeping with our objectives. So in so much of the planning moving forward, we depend on discretion at the administrative level. So when any plans, so many plans come forward for approval, there is discretion with different use of different language, should or shall, and must or may. I think this is a reasonable place to give administration a bit of discretion so that, because development doesn't always occur exactly as we're writing it on the paper. This is not providing the opportunity to jump from phase 1 to phase 4 or anything like that. It's, when moving from phase 1 to 2A, it may be that there's some details that have to be tidied up or fully completed, but it is realistic to, I think, and reasonable to allow for some of the planning for the next phase to at least be discussed with the administration prior to the last nail being driven in the previous phase. That's my opinion. I do have confidence and trust in future administration to use their discretion and to recognize the intent. And if this isn't amended, then it becomes contradictory to some of the other sections. Councillor Seeley.
Yeah, I don't like the word should. However, when we look at the commercial intent, I think this does satisfy it. It gives some flexibility, but it's reasonable, and the commercial will be built. So it's saying that it won't be. So I like this. I'll support it.
Other discussion from members of council? Councillor McCallum.
I'll support this. We've already heard from administration that the control in any shift in the phasing is entirely in the hands of administration, and I believe that they understand the intent and would follow through with that. Yeah, thank you.
And as I mentioned, I would be concerned that if this isn't approved, there might be contradictions that we set up with other sections. I don't know if administration has thoughts on that and could jump in. And if not, then I'm going to.
Sorry, yes, I can come in. So if council would like to look at 11.6, which is essentially the focus of all of these amendments, Mayor Borelman, the current wording for policy 1 under 11.6 was your amendment at second reading. So the original language in the ASP was not a shall, it was a should. And after discussions with Three Sisters Mountain Village, we took a focus on this section and saw that there were contradictions. So for example, policy number 3 reads that phases to accommodate commercial development within the indoor recreation village center or innovation district areas may commence earlier than what is outlined in map 22. So you can't allow things to start earlier if you have prescriptive language in policy 1 that says shall. And similarly in policy 5, which is about the adaptive monitoring and management plan, it says that the development of future phases will proceed in accordance with the monitoring and adaptive management plan. The intent of that policy is that if we learn something through that plan that suggests certain phasings should occur first or shouldn't go ahead at all, then that's why a should language is better, so that it gives us that flexibility to modify future phases based on that monitoring and adaptive management plan. So that's the contradictions.
Thanks for helping me with that. To that point and to the discussion, I don't know, Councillor Sanford, if that provides you with any reassurance on supporting this amending motion or not. If you have any, yes, go ahead.
Yes, I think that is a good explanation. And I know that this was reviewed by planning. It makes it more available for planning to determine that phasing, and planning knows what the direction of council is. So in the sense, planning will understand that, and I accept that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there any other discussion to be had on this somewhat complex amendment? See none, I'll call the question then. Those in favor and opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I do have one other amendment to bring forward, which isn't reviewed in the attachment, the summary of the meeting. This is not something that administration had felt, but it's something that really just I've been thinking about for some time. And Councillor, Ms. Hyde, if you could put this on the share screen, it has to do with responding to the broad interest we've heard from the community around the possibility of creating a conservation land trust. And I see real value in having that land trust created and funded, and then to lead to discussions with Three Sisters landowners to consider opportunities for purchasing some of the lands for the land trust, specifically around those two pinch points that have been identified in the past at the northwest end of the SP and also at the southeast end of the SP. This is not prescriptive language. It doesn't force anybody to do anything, but it does set up the conversation so that there's reassurance that both the land trust, if it's created, and the landowner will enter into good faith discussions. And perhaps through this tool, we will find some benefit in the future, and perhaps resulting in an even more functional corridor. So it's a lot of words. I've given people time to read it, but it's no deeper than it appears at first read. And I welcome questions from members of council on this proposed amendment. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. So up until this point, there's actually, like, the language in your amendment is, isn't prescriptive, it's more permissive. So as much as this is suggesting a possible outcome, there's nothing stopping or nothing having stopped people from organizing a conservation land trust up to this point, correct?
Correct. And there had been discussions in the community several years ago around this. I was involved with for a number of reasons. It just couldn't get legs, but it seems from what I'm hearing from the community that there's quite a bit of interest, and people are offering to support a conservation land trust. So I have a feeling that this could finally come to pass.
And so whether third reading is passed or not, this is more, again, a suggestion, a public suggestion to the community that they want to give this initiative some legs on their own. So whether this is passed or whether third reading is passed or not, this is still something that could occur no matter.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I just saw value in having a reference in the area structure plan, because if it is approved, that becomes the high-level guiding document, and it sets up those conversations to be successful, I would hope.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just wanted to confirm your intent and understand how far-reaching this suggestion could be. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, if third reading is not approved, does this just disappear, or would you bring it forward as a motion to council at a future meeting?
I guess that's up for future council discussion.
Okay, but if
As Councillor McCallum has noted, it is not prescriptive. It's just acknowledging what's been described in the community as a strong interest. It's simply acknowledging it as part of the ASP. It's really as simple as that. And if the ASP is defeated, it doesn't preclude the same thing from happening.
okay, thanks.
Further discussion then on the motion, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Now that I understand the phasing plan a little more thoroughly, I'm not sure why it's referring specifically to phase 2B. So if a consortium of people wanted to have some of this land into a land trust, why would we have to wait until 2B for the first subdivision application?
Oh, well, that was administration discussed this possibility with the land owner, and they were interested in having a date specified. I don't think that's at all onerous. And phase 2B is actually the first phase that will show any development sort of up against the fence line. And in my opinion, there should be interest actually in having the discussion before phase 2B, because there is a pinch point that's been identified that's essentially within that phase. I would see real value in having this conversation before phase 2B starts, so that it can be accomplished and recognized within the ultimate planning. There's no certainty how many years this will take if this plan's approved to build out, but it could be decades. That's all there is to it, really. I mean, it's as simple as that.
So this wording implies that phase 1, phase 2A, and the beginning of phase 2B would all be underway before this particular option would be available to a land trust.
No, it's available before that, like from the approval of the ASP, a discussion could commence.
Or 10 years following the approval of the village ASP.
Whichever is earlier, right?
Okay, but do you imagine that phase 2B is going to be within 10 years or past 10 years?
I couldn't say. I'm not a developer. Well, think about the development phasing of Spring Creek Mountain Village, for instance. When it was approved in 2004, it was expected to be fully complete by, within 16 years, so by last year, if I recall. But reality happened there. There was global crash and development demand for development died. Our building permits plummeted from $250 million a year to 20 million. So it's impossible to look at a development and say, well, that will be complete in X number of years. It depends so much on ongoing demand and capacity of proposed, of people that may want to own a building in there. I mean, it's like looking into a crystal ball to try and come up with a date or a number of years for build out. And truthfully, it could never be built out. Who knows? I mean,
Yeah, so my issue with this is that 2B is somewhere down the road, plus or minus 10 years. And 10 years is the pivot point where if 2B doesn't happen, that's when the community has a choice to do this.
if there's real interest if there's interest in the community, I would expect to see the conversation starting right away. I'm not really following
Well,
your concern here.
okay, the wording says a notice of intent to purchase is provided prior to 60 days following the submission of the first subdivision application within phase 2B.
Uh-huh. Like
Prior-
sometime in the future.
Prior to 60 days following the submission. Yeah, I'm having a trouble with the timing on that.
Well, essentially that's some years into the future. So there's a number of years provided. Don't know how many, well, up to 10 years following the approval for the conversation to start. I see that as being fairly clear direction. Regardless, this is not prescriptive. It's not critical to the success of the ASP. It's just recognizing a need within or an interest within the community.
So
and
I'm
if
just
there's
trying to understand, could that conversation start today?
Yes.
Well, yeah,
Prior to 60 days?
if the ASP is approved today, yeah, it could start today.
Okay.
Respectfully, it could have started 5 to 10 years ago.
Good point. Well, it sort of did, but didn't get legs. Anyways, has that cleared that up for you, Councillor?
I just don't know what the reference to prior to 60 days following the submission.
Can I provide a suggestion, Your
Words in there
Worship?
that don't make it clear, but if you're saying that it could start today, then that's what the intent is.
Today is prior to 60 days following the submission of the first, yeah, it could pop in tomorrow. Councillor McCallum, you have a comment?
I believe the intent, through the chair to Councillor Sanford, I believe the intent of this from the landowner is to ensure that they don't invest in an incredible amount of time and energy and application fees, et cetera, if there's a massive change to happen to that particular plan area. And so that is why they're trying to stipulate this, is that enough notice is provided to them so that they can start those discussions earlier. And yeah, again, whether we actually pass this or not, Councillor Sanford, in my opinion, these discussions can happen and could have been happening for a long time already. As Mayor Barman's indicated, we had conversations with the Kootenai Conservation Trust to understand their model, 5 or 6 years ago. And that's certainly a model that could work here, as well as a number of any other models that exist within the country and in North America. So I think that this is, again, just sort of feeding an idea. It is a permissive in nature. There's nobody forcing anybody to do anything, but it's just planting a seed of idea within the community.
Are there other councillors? Councillor Sanford?
So to understand this more thoroughly, after the 60 days of the submission of application for phase 2B, this is no longer an option?
That's how it reads.
Okay. So that is the intent, because there's a lot of befores, prior tos, and followings that make it a little bit hard to understand. So
Okay,
for explaining that.
great. Is there other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. There are other amending motions to bring forward? Seeing none, then we're back to third reading of the bylaw as amended. And I'm sure all councillors will have quite a bit to say at this point. I'll speak in support of the bylaw. I'm sure that won't surprise too many in the community. If anybody's been paying attention for the last 10 years to what I've said, I've always indicated I'm not opposed to development as long as it's outside of the corridors and meets our community needs. And in my opinion, this ASP, which has been really significantly changed or amended by council to make it fit what council sees as meeting our community needs. I think council's done a very good job throughout this process, and we've certainly we've had a great conversation with the community, and so many people in the community have been very involved in this process, which has helped a lot in shaping the ASP to be something that I can support, and hopefully others as well. But in essence, and I've said this before, the status quo, what we have right now is not sustainable. We're becoming more and more a place for wealthy or very wealthy people, and the opportunity for young residents and young families and others to become established here without some source of wealth is becoming less likely. And I don't really need to speak too much about that. Everybody in town understands that. So I really believe that to use the analogy that's been referred to in the past, the gates of wealth are closing down, and we have to do what we can to keep them open and allow for continued opportunity for new people, new residents to join us here. And I continue to welcome new neighbors and friends in Canmore. And we really have to provide certainty for controlled affordable housing in the future. This ASP, thanks to the motion put forward by Councillor McCallum and supported by all councillors, has directed that 20% of all residential units will be affordable housing that meets the requirements as established by the Housing Corporation. And that's so big. I mean, that's really important part of this ASP, that certainty of a large number of residential units for the nurses and the plumbers and the bus drivers and you name it, people that aren't earning $100,000 a year. So that's one of the key components that brings me to want to support the ASP. And we've talked quite a bit about providing uncertainty around stronger or healthier mix of commercial and residential. Our target for years has we haven't been meeting that tax split that we've identified for years, and through the very healthy amount of commercial zoning in this proposed ASP, we'll start to move. Well, I would suggest that we may get to our target of the of a healthy tax split. And I really like the vision that's expressed for both the Village Center and the Innovation District. It provides for it's a real opportunity for a variety of types of businesses, particularly in the Innovation District. We're seeing some of that starting to happen in town, businesses that are being developed in sectors other than tourism, and the town has been very supportive in broadening our economy and including sectors other than tourism. And with the development that we've recently approved in the Gateway District, we know there will be some strength in other sectors developing there. I understand we've heard that the University of Saskatchewan will be having a facility there. I hope that proceeds. The other thought that I've had in mind, and this is in, I guess, response to the really serious congestion that we've experienced most recently in the downtown core and some of our facilities in this part of Canmore. The region is growing, the population of the region is really growing noticeably, and we're going to see more and more visitors from the region coming to Canmore. And if there's a really attractive resort village that's established out on the Three Sisters lands, as I think this ASP describes, there'll be an option for visitors to choose to go to that village area and enjoy the recreational opportunities that are provided in the ASP area, and spend time in the village center in Three Sisters, where there'll be interesting shops and coffee shops and restaurants and whatnot. So if this project proceeds as I envision, we'll in time see a lessening of the congestion or the demand that's being placed on our downtown. We've acknowledged we can't, the downtown is a fixed area. We just can't simply continue to increase road widths or parking or whatever to meet the growing needs. I know that members of the community are wondering if council's been listening through this 6 months process now. I think it's 6 months since the ASP first became council's business. And I would suggest that council's listened very carefully, and we've responded directly to what we've heard, not only at the public hearing, but through a number of other forums. Certainly when council defeated the Smith Creek Area Structure Plan at second reading, it was clear we were sharing the concern and responding to the concern about the possibility of moving the urban growth boundary. That council indicated that's not what we should be doing right now, and the rezoning of the conservation of wildlands area, that was defeated. That wasn't supported by council, and we heard very clearly and agreed with what the community was saying on that matter. And we've really made some significant changes to the village ASP that was first presented at first reading. And I've drawn your attention already to the 20% of affordable housing amendment. That I think that's just one of the most commendable things the council's done in my time of paying attention. I talked about this during the discussion earlier, but with the commercial tax space that's being provided just in the village center, 340,000 square feet at grade retail, 500,000 to 1 million square feet of commercial resort accommodation in phase one. These are really significant responses to our need for increased commercial. So I think that's a very strong part of the ASP. I know there's questions abound around the functionality of the established corridor, and we've had so much discussion we've had so much discussion on that matter at this council, and we did earlier today. I support the idea of trying an exclusionary fence. And I've said before that what we have going right now, the status quo, is simply not working, in my opinion. We see thousands of people recreating in the corridors, and that's got to change. I think a fence will be a very, very obvious tool that will significantly reduce the number of people that go to recreate in the corridors, and also reduce the number of animals that come into the developed area and ultimately get into trouble in those areas. I recognize the fence might not work, but through the monitoring and the adaptation plans and through the phasing that shows development up closer to the fence being some years away, I believe we will have the opportunity to test the idea and see if the fence does work as envisioned, and if not, then we'll be able to adapt. I know there's concerns, serious and understandable concerns about developing on undermined lands, but I put a lot of confidence in the direction within the undermining review regulation, and I'm not sure if everybody in the community has read these regulations, but people that have will know that there's very strenuous, rigorous process that has to be engaged in at 3 different levels of development. So at the area plan development stage, which we're at right now, it states, and I'm going to read from it, the developer must, at the developer's expense, engage a professional engineer to prepare an area mining impact overview report. And then on the receipt of that report, the report compliance certificate, the developer must, again at the developer's expense, engage in an independent third-party engineer to review that overview report. So that's a very stringent process, and it's similar to what we put in practice or what we follow for environmental impact statements and whatnot. But in regards to this development, the exact same process then has to take place again at the subdivision stage with 2 separate engineers involved in verifying the work. And again at the development permit stage. So 3 different stages of development. There's very stringent, informed work that's being done to propose how development, how the land can be mitigated to allow for the development there. And I know that the members of the community that sat on the committee that proposed these revised regulations that were approved last year by the cabinet in Edmonton, and I've heard that from professional expert opinion, the regulations are excellent. And it's important also to recognize, to understand that the town will be following, looking at the same reports, the same studies. So before the town would accept any of the land that's proposed for municipal ownership with municipal infrastructure, the town will be assured that the development, whether it's a trail or whatever the infrastructure is, has met all 6 of those rigorous studies. There's been concern raised around our lack of engagement with the Stoney Nakoda initially, and council's acknowledged that was amiss. We should have inserted something into the terms of reference for the ASPs several years ago, but we didn't. But now we have added terms into the ASP that ensure the Stoney Nakoda can be engaged with development planning if they so choose. And we've also directed administration to initiate a process to establish an MOU with Stoney Nakoda Nation so that we have an ongoing engagement process. And so we know through that the Estonian Dakota will be involved in other substantive issues that come forward within the town of Canmore. And I could speak longer, but I'm going to open the floor up for other comments. So to the motion to give third reading, Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. It's been a very long process, as everyone's aware. But at this time, I am not going to be able to support third reading. I think I agree. Council has done a lot of excellent things with amending this bylaw. I think it's far and above better than it was when it first came to us. But I do think that there's still areas that need to be addressed that just can't be addressed through amendments. When I went to administration with my amendments that have been now instilled in the current bylaw, I asked if there was a way to retain the unfinished golf course as either a golf course or other outdoor recreation amenities. And administration, very wisely, in my opinion, said that that's not really an amendment that can be done, as it's such a broad amendment. It would require a complete shift in this ASP, and it's really more just a new ASP if that's what we were looking for, because you'd have to move entire sections of the plan, and it's not a simple amendment. And I think that is one of the greatest concerns that I heard throughout this entire process, is just the overall footprint, development footprint of this ASP. To me, if we could somehow have the current 2004 ASP, that development area, but with the substance of what we've amended this bylaw to, that would be the place to start. A lot of the things that we've added in here are better than 2004 ASP, but the 2004 ASP still has certain areas that I feel trump this current bylaw. And unfortunately, I think that they really need to be combined to really gain that support from the community. I just think that more needs to be done. So at this time, I won't be able to support third reading.
So is your thinking informed by your hesitation to allow for development on the undermined lands, or the use of fence to establish functional corridor? Not sure what.
It's a combination. The undermining, the regulations I do think are strong, but at the same time, you can never eliminate all risk in life, and I think we should all know that. I live in Grotto, and there's a chance, that it's an alluvial fan, so there's always a risk there that flooding could take out the homes in this area. I have no problem with the risk associated with it, but at the same time, one of the easiest mitigations for risk is just not to do it. So that does come into play. The wildlife fence, I actually think, would be something to try. I know that there's concern in the community that it's just going to fail, but same time, if it hasn't been tried before and we try it and it's completely successful, it may pave the way for the future for other communities to do a wildlife fence and actually help with that human wildlife conflict. There's always a risk to anything we do. There's a risk that if we put the fencing in, it wouldn't work. And there's also a chance though that it would work, and it would work quite well. So I don't have a concern with the fencing. Again, it's more just from what I heard from the public throughout the public hearing and through just all the correspondence that we've received, is that a lot of people stated that they don't have a problem with development. It's just the size of development. I've had many conversations where they said if it was a smaller footprint, and which we did address through the amendments that I brought forward, we addressed that with lowering the unit counts, but the footprint doesn't change with that amendment. The footprint is still a large area, and basically the 2004 ASP has a much better footprint in my mind. And if we could find a way to marry these two and get that footprint, but with the substance that we've come up with, that to me would be supported by the community. It's still never going to be 100% supported, but I think we'd have a much higher support from the community. I think that is where we need to go with this. So unfortunately, as that's not a real possible amendment, the only way is to defeat this and let the applicant take this and come back with something better.
In the spirit of the debate, we cut the footprint of the development in half, more or less, when we defeated the Smith Creek area structure plan. So I thought council responded very directly to what you just referenced, that people are, many people have said they're supportive of some growth, just not all that was proposed with the two ASPs. So we've supported only 50% essentially of what was proposed. So that's significant reduction in footprint. Yeah, Councillor Sanford, thank you.
I'll take Councillor Hillstad off the hot seat for a minute there. Well, even with the amendments that have been proposed and reworked through planning, and I appreciate that we did give the applicant time to work with planning on some of the amendments to improve them. I still can't support this, the third reading of the Three Sisters Village ASP. The increase in population as a result of shifting the commercial resort accommodation, and that is hotel rooms, to high density housing will create more demand on community services, and operating costs will be higher. And we're going into a residential tax base with that. The new phasing plan proposes to build housing on the lowest risk areas of the site. The risk to the community is that the commercial development costs will become prohibitive on the highest constraint land and thus never get built once the residential is achieved. In 1992, the NRCB granted permission to the owners to develop a resort to help the community prosper economically after the mines closed in 1979. The 2004 ASP was the town's way to respond to that permission granted to the NRCB in 1992. Now, this transfer of visitor accommodation to the village visitor accommodation, in my mind, is going to increase part-time ownership, and the desirability of that product is something that I wanted to see very specifically in hotel accommodation. But the 2004 ASP was not a slam dunk. It was not a perfect document when it was first approved. It underwent numerous amendments at second reading, and later a number of deficiencies were identified and addressed, including the deficiencies cited in the Golder 2002 report and the COMEX report of 2005. It was a work in progress, and I even attended a memorable council meeting where Councillor Andre Garot passionately advocated for buildings to be moved below the cabin line. It was evident that all the vulnerabilities that currently exist in our ecosystem with growth, development, and population increases were recognized way back then, and amendments were made to the Resort Center ASP to address conditions that were clearly already a threat to wildlife. The new Three Sisters Village ASP, with extensive amendments, some not wholeheartedly supported by the applicant, is not an improvement over the existing 2004 ASP. Many amendments were made to the 2004 ASP, which included abundant space for seasonal wildlife movement and recreational land to support that goal. I have very low confidence in the new fencing plan. I think the placement will result in corralling wildlife that is trying to connect to the corridor from the river and the valley bottom. In addition, the third-party review of the EIS suggested that wildlife would be displaced by the fencing plan and have unknown effects on other parts of town. Humans will also be constrained in the corridor, and increased wildlife-human conflict and interaction will likely take place. And Councillor Hillstad did refer to this earlier. This footprint size and the scale and the scope of this new SP is of concern to the community. They came out loud and clear during the public hearing, which was the community's opportunity to respond to the proposed ASP at the Three Sisters Village. This ASP, as amended, also moves the development in the plan area away from climate change incentives and more towards incentivizing population growth. We need to be planning and building for the future with this long-term project, which has only accumulated more challenges as time marches on. The current 2004 ASP is what the new owner purchased with the land when it was bought out of receivership. It is developable land in an appropriate way that has been amended by previous councils to address wildlife needs. The NRCB ruling clearly approved the application to construct a recreational and tourism project in the town of Canmore, but left the ultimate decision with the town of Canmore to determine if the applicant effectively reached that goal. 30 years from now, if this resort is economically built out on land with low undermining constraints, adjacent to a recreational area that supports large animals, mammals, freely moving in and out of the Canadian Rockies, the owner of this land will have an attraction second to none in the world. Like Emerald Lake Lodge or Lake O'Hara Lodge or Moraine Lake Lodge, or the first class 29-room Fogo Island Inn in Newfoundland, these resorts have road access to spectacular landscapes, and they are all highly sought after destinations. There is literally hundreds of Canmore residents who could make a resort like this world-class with their knowledge, expertise, and passion to support the resource and a successful operation. A resort as envisioned in the 2004 ASP would be a generous legacy left to future generations by the owners of this precious jewel of land in balance with nature. We as a community can help you succeed, but we need your generous spirit to make it so. Within this vision in mind, I won't be supporting third reading of Three Sisters Mountain Village ASP as amended. Thank you.
Further discussion to the motion to give third reading. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. First, I would like to say I appreciate all the time and research and effort put into these ASPs by administration, council, developer, and the community as a whole that have put into this ASPs. As stated before, council's job is to read, listen, and ask questions, and take all the information and make the best decision possible. Taking into consideration the property rights of the landowner, the benefits of the development to the community, the environmental, safety, and cumulative impact concerns. Then we make the best decision in the interest of the community as a whole. The question is, does this ASP have a substantial benefit to the community as amended? The amendments brought forward by council have brought us closer to what we heard from the community and align with council's objectives. I feel we can still do better. It comes to the footprint of the development as a whole, as we heard through the public hearing and from the community. It's letters that we received. I agree with Councillor Hillstad and Sanford have eloquently said things that I support. I believe that the 2004 footprint, as Councillor Hillstad said, could be amalgamated with this, the things that are brought forward in the amendments in this ASP. And in a time that we are learning and continuing to hear from our residents of the Valley, including our wildlife residents, and taking them into consideration, putting this much population up against very sensitive wildlife corridor is a concern for me. As once said, you can always add more, but you can't take away. So I find myself not being able to support this ASP as presented at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. Is there further discussion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I started off this job being my authentic self, and over time have gotten a bit more quiet. But in this conversation, I'm going to be my authentic self and speak authentically, and that might get me in trouble with the public, but I think that's okay. First I want to speak about some of what I've heard in the community with regards to the process that we've been through. And I want everyone to understand that in our jobs, we're meant to make decisions for the whole community. This means that quite regularly we find ourselves with one group of folks happy and another group not, but no matter, we are beholden to the community as a whole, as a group, not to any one lobby, company, or individual. And I think that the requirement of councillors to be disciplined and to contain or ignore their bias during land use processes is very frustrating for the public. Naturally, people want to see decision makers rallying in one way or another, but the MGA commands decision makers to keep our minds open, to tuck away our bias, and to stay neutral during proceedings, much like a judgment would. This is part and parcel of ensuring that we are providing procedural fairness along the way to all. So I understand the public frustration. I felt that too, and I've read it in your words and I've heard it in your voices. And I have spoken to many people who have a variety of nuanced opinions on this ASP. It has been pointed out not only by my colleagues, but by the public, that there are some parts of the plan that could really move our community forward on certain challenges, while possibly, unfortunately, leaving other parts of our values behind. It's also been pointed out that there are existing land use on the subject parcel. So as we know, the developer could pull the pin and pursue development on those lands at any time. Saying no to this ASP doesn't mean that development can't or won't happen on those lands. But that plan nor this plan, in my opinion, does not meet the present nor future needs of our community in its entirety. And in that vein, council tried to make it better, to be pragmatic as we have been elected to do, to put the work in and to work together, to work to represent all voices, work within our jurisdictions. With the statutory information provided us, we are making decisions. We're working to actively participate in trying to shape the ASP to the will of what we heard, what we read, and what we know. And don't forget, we don't have the luxury of partisanship. So you can imagine for many of us, this has been very difficult. During the course of the public hearings and in reading submissions, I feel like we touched on every theme and topic possible, both locally and globally. It was mind-blowing, really. Traffic, privilege, food security, conservation, property rights, affordability, universal inequity, political systems, wildlife, change, connection, history, diversity, inclusion, Indigenous rights, capitalism, economy, wealth, and process are just a few of the words that I wrote in a word bubble after the hearings. The public took the opportunity to articulate all of their global concerns, and in some cases assigned their concerns to this application and to local government to solve. But it is clear we will never be able to meet every need and want in this application. I think that it is a sign of the times that citizens are looking more locally for solutions to community challenges. So many feel completely disconnected from upper levels of government, yet connected locally, and are coming to the town to solve all-encompassing problems that are much bigger than ourselves. So as much as I would like to address each and every single topic that came up during the public hearing as I'd listed and through the submissions, I have a short time allotted, and I personally would like to speak to the concept of connection. So over the course of the pandemic and through these 6 months of ASPs, we have worked so hard as a community and as a society to stay connected, to keep people connected, to provide opportunities for connection. And we can see through the hearings how hungry the public was for connection. And I want to commend local organizations such as Siam, Bow Valley Naturalists, BOCORD, and lobbies such as BODA and Bow Valley Engage for rallying that connection. We have heard some of the community request a repeat of the community plan development process that we call Mining the Future, in search of further connection and to have a better hand in shaping the future of our community's development. But this kind of exercise is no small feat and cannot be done off the side of someone's desk over a summer. This is something that the next elected council might consider as part of their strategic planning, and they will have to put substantial dollars behind this multi-year effort because it is not something that can be done off the side of someone's desk. However, if we want to be truly inclusive, we need to work hard for that inclusivity. For as much as we saw so many people engage during our public hearings and write us, I also noted the absence of those who couldn't engage or who were missing. To ensure a truly valid visioning process, we need to work even harder at connection with each other, and specifically with those in our community that's disenfranchised or feel left behind. We need to have uncomfortable conversations about our individual privilege and how we can use that privilege collectively to make Canmore better for everyone and for our natural environment. We need to continue to build a Canmore for everyone. Living out our community values and vision do not come free. And we cannot expect other people to pay for them. If value topics such as the environment, climate action, affordability, equity, community are important, then we should be willing to own a solution and work and resource those solutions together. These things come at a cost, and if we value it, we should pay for it. Otherwise, we have learned nothing from the collective action we have witnessed over the last few weeks and the facts and truths that have been spoken from the public over the last few months. I'm going to go back to the plan now, though. In speaking to the plan, what did I like? I appreciated the proximity of the compact area to existing development, the innovation hub, the hotel and commercial uses mixed with the various types of housing. I appreciate the recreational amenities, and I feel that they were very well thought out. Much like John Pachowski, conceptually, I thought the fence just might work. As we have heard, education is not enough, and our behavior is not getting any better. We have tried everything else up to this point, and it isn't working. And I will remind the public that the fence is not to keep the wildlife in. It is to keep you and me out. It is meant to be a visual and physical barrier to remind us of that special place. Because as much as I heard such love for the wildlife and the needed protection for the corridors, I was aghast at the sheer entitlement to wander through those protected wild spaces, knowing the stress it puts on our wildlife. It may be legal, but I question if it's moral. Even our Indigenous neighbors pointed out this issue in their submission. If we love the wildlife, as we say we do, we will simply stay out of those corridors and reconsider recreating there, no matter the inconvenience to us or our dogs. During the last reading, the majority members of council did their best to make amendments. My goal from the beginning has always been pragmaticism, working with my colleagues to amend the plan in response to feedback. There comes a point, however, as Councillor Hillstad pointed out, that any further amendments are not cohesive, and in the end, one is looking for a whole new plan. I have concluded that I am unable to make any more amendments without robbing the plan of its cohesiveness, and those amendments could really do more harm than good. Getting past second reading, I'm having trouble squaring away a few things in my mind, which I discussed at second reading. Firstly, the plan to build on the unfinished golf course. I could not imagine a way to amend development to the cabin line and then shift uses in the plan. And so I would have preferred to align the plan area to the cabin line, which is the expectation that the community has had since 2004. The second thing I'm struggling with is the absence of provincial leadership in wildlife conservation and how that conflicts with the very large role that the province has in the overall plan and wildlife management in general. Throughout the ASP, the Adaptive Management Plan, the province is stated as a partner in monitoring, enforcement, funding, etc. There is an inference of active partnership in these documents. However, I have not seen that level of active partnership currently within their operations. And as a result at this time, I'm not confident of its presence moving forward. I gotta say that by the time we hit day 4 of the public hearing, I was hoping a provincial representative would just pop appear and show up and speak to the concerns and criticisms that were being levied by the public on both the undermining legislation as well as the wildlife management. But instead we received silence. Their role in the success of this plan is critical, not just in delineation of wild spaces, but in putting resources behind addressing human-wildlife conflict in those spaces. Indigenous consultation. Indigenous consultation is a capital I, capital C. Our Indigenous neighbors have asked that our municipality request Indigenous consultation of the landowner. And I believe that this is something the town of Canmore can request. And administration, I believe, did request in preparation of the plan. But what is not clear to me is where the town's jurisdiction and authority and obligation lay after the consultation is completed. In fact, there's actually a really interesting article in the Globe and Mail today on a similar topic. However today's vote shapes out, though, I am committed to following through on an MOU with our Indigenous neighbors that is within the scale and scope of our abilities and our jurisdiction as a municipality. And I am committed to right relations with our Indigenous neighbors. In conclusion, I want to say I'm really proud of the amendments that I and my colleagues made, and that the public should be really proud of those as well. I believe that 20%, as much as it can be criticized, I believe we're empowered under the NRCB to have that. And I think that there were some very valuable elements in this draft, but I would prefer this draft to show a similar footprint as is seen in the 2004 ASP. The spirit of the now amended draft and the comments around this table should prove as a starting point to the landowners when moving forward on the next application. There will be another application, I'm sure of it. So in the spirit of all I've spoken to and a whole lot more, I will be unable to support third reading of the village ASP as presented. Thank you.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Yeah, this has been a very long and interesting process, and I think it's a lot better than where we started. Council's made some substantive amendments shaping the ASP with significant community input. There's better alignment with previous planning documents, and other amendments to reduce residential by 1/3 and increase commercial encapsulates a better community vision. Affordable housing amendments were also unprecedented and very good, and I supported those. Smaller footprint that supports no development south of the Cavan line is my preference, and the 2004 ASP footprint is a better template. This ASP has taken a very positive direction. It's close, but not quite there in my opinion.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, this has been a real struggle, and I've been going back and forth because there's so much that we achieved through the amendments. The biggest one being affordable housing. Since I've lived here, so that's a long time now, it's 40 years or so or more. Housing has always been, and increasingly so, more difficult to get into for young families, and it's been just such a struggle. When I go to look at these ASPs, I look at the documents and listen to our administration planning and the public hearing, of course. We had so many people contact us to say, did you hear us? I think in 5.5, 8-hour days, plus the emails, plus the telephone calls, I think that we had no choice but to hear you. The question is, did we listen? We clearly listened by the way that we addressed your concerns with our amendments. But I have to agree with my fellow councillors, I will not be able to support this, and I'm sad about that, because one of the things that I heard at the public hearing was anxiety and fear of change and fear of risk, and all of those things, I think, in not large part, but COVID had something to do with that. That this is an era of real uncertainty. It sort of reminds me, being an old person, I remember of the bomb. You know, when I was in grade 4, we had drills where we hid under our desks in case the bomb dropped. Like, how crazy is that? But it terrified me as a kid, and it's kind of a similar time now. So we have to keep our heads clear and set aside bias and look at the facts. And as Joanna, Councillor McCallum pointed out, to look at things objectively and look at the evidence and look at the, so I tried to do that. I tried to be able to approve this plan in my own mind, because that would get rid of the uncertainty, and there would be a road that we know that we have to travel. And I just couldn't do it. It felt like trying to put on a pair of shoes that were too small. There were too many things that were not addressed. So I could go on, but my counselor colleagues have done better than I ever could, I think. And yeah, I will not be able to support this third reading.
Well, I guess there's not a whole lot of point in me entering into debate. I'm certainly disappointed by where this is going.
Oh, Your
What?
Worship, sorry. There was one other thing I wanted to say about the land trust idea. And there were things that occurred to me as people were speaking at the public hearing. And there were questions that I wanted to ask that I couldn't, of course, because we were supposed to be listening. But over and over, there were certain people who spoke, and I wanted to ask them, what would you give up to have the things you want in their community? And I think Councillor mentioned earlier, everything has a cost. So if there are things that you want, what would you be prepared to give up for that or pay for that? Or, you know, people in this community need to think about that. And yes, it's a rhetorical question, but think about that. What would you give up? What would you be prepared to pay? And it could be philosophical, could be, you know, monetary, like that. So if you want a certain type of community, then you have to figure out how to get there, and you have to navigate around these roadblocks. So people can't even stay out of the damn corridors, you know. Sorry, pardon my language, but just start with that, you know, picking up dog poop, you know, picking up garbage in the community, being kind to each other. Like, those things are difficult, it seems, for people, and come to a place where we can dialogue and rather than attack each other. So that if, you know, we had some pretty nasty emails, not a lot, you know, not every single one, and the tone softened down as people were, I think, advised by others to sort of like, that's not the way to, bullying people is not the way to win an argument, not in this town, not in this community, and not with this council. So I would have encouraged someone to step up and form a land trust. It's complicated, it's legal, it's expensive, it's a lot of work. But if you want to get the things you want, like to increase the size of the corridor, I was briefly looking into land trusts in other places, in BC in particular, and Ontario. And then let's get rolling. Let's do it, you know. But it's something you could do that is concrete and that would have a long-term effect in the valley. Anyway, so this came so close, as someone else said, but it just didn't get over the finish line. So we'll look at the next one. I won't, but future council will. So that's it. That's all I have to say. And I encourage you, someone, to take that land trust idea and run with it. That's it.
Thank you again, Councillor. And as I started to say, there's clearly no point in me beating this dead horse. It's not close, so I'm disappointed, of course. I saw this as an opportunity to bring some balance to our community, but now that balance will continue to be uncertain until some future time in the future time. Who knows when, where, how, but this growing imbalance, particularly a social imbalance that we experience today in our community is, in my opinion, going to get worse. But I certainly will accept and support the decision of council. Council's decision is always right, whether or not I voted in the same way as the rest of council. I'm disappointed, but I'll support council's decision. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Before council has the opportunity to vote on this, I'd actually just like to take a moment to thank you for leading us through this process again. It is not easy to be the mayor of this community, and I know that. And I know that you have spent countless hours reviewing, engaging, listening, reading to come up with your opinion. And although your opinion is different than the rest of council's, it doesn't make it any less valid. And so I just want you to know that I am really grateful to you for the work that you have done in leading us through this very complex and difficult process. I know that you are an eternal optimist, and that's rare for people your age. But I have had the pleasure of working alongside of you for a decade now, and I really appreciate your willingness and your ability to continue to be positive and to smile even in the face of such adversity. We have seen some ugly, ugly communications come through us, through our inboxes over the last 5 months, and you have certainly taken the brunt of it, sir. So I want to thank you again for leading us through this process.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll just acknowledge that the same could be said of so many people, as not only on council, but in our community. Everybody's put their heart and soul and put a lot of time into this discussion. So again, decision of council is always right. So I can't be on the same side as the decision with every vote. I'm disappointed, but there you have it. But thank you for those kind words. And with that, I then will call the question on third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? And opposed? And the motion's defeated with Mayor Borman in support. And just before I adjourn the meeting, I'll just reflect very briefly on what we've been talking about and the challenges, the anxiety and the angst that's built in our community over the last 6 months and more than 6 months. And I truly hope that with this decision, our community can move past the challenging conversations that we've had and pull together, work together again to continue to build a community that is the place we want to live and we want our kids to grow up in. And yeah, I'm looking forward to putting this behind us and having positive engagement within the community around a number of other issues that'll be coming along soon. And with that, I will move the meeting be adjourned.